So I'm well into my 50s now, and I realize that a man only needs 4 things in order to make himself feel at home. A warm bed, a cold drink, comfortable shoes, and a quiet place to poop. I'm working on that last one. We spent decades chasing the American dream, only to realize that working more to have more wasn't exactly the dream we expected to be living. Together, we walked away from it all to rediscover what's really necessary to live a rewarding life. Inspired by other YouTubers, we bought a fixer-upper sailboat in the hopes of discovering the world anew. Just as soon as we learned to sail. Well, we're still afloat. If you watched the last episode, you know I came close to sinking us with a thru-hull. Man. As I got to working on the head. But now I'm coming to you from the almost fully completed head on Garuda. So all kidding aside, living on a sailboat is about sailing, or being able to move your home from place to place. And the primary requirement for me right now to be able to get off the dock is having a functioning head. In the meantime, let me catch you up a little bit about what we've been working on. But I will start with one throwback from last week, and that is the thru-hull. Okay, so as you know, the thru-hull allows water from outside the boat to enter the boat, or for liquids inside the boat to be able to exit the boat. We have one such thru-hull located right here conveniently under the sink. This thru-hull services 3 independent drains. The first is the sink here in the head. The second is a drain inside the shower. And the third is a utility drain actually inside the main compartment of the head. So naturally, putting a hole through the boat below the water line would not surprisingly allow water into the boat. Now this can be combated a number of ways, but the simplest way is that there's hosing attached to the thru-hull. So if you can just imagine the end of the tube is just an extension of the hole in the boat. So wherever the end of the tube is, water is going to come out. How does this get combated? Well, if you were to lift that tube above the water line, then the pressure of the water outside would equalize at the height of the water. Conversely, attaching that line directly to a fixture, like a faucet or the toilet itself, would only allow water to flow from outside of the boat to the fixture. This would just be a very fancy siphon, allowing seawater to come from outside of the boat, freely flowing through the fixture. So to combat this, we put in a vented loop. So a vented loop is created by running hosing up and above the water line, which in itself can be a trick because we're dealing with limited space here on the boat. In addition to that, this boat as a sailboat heels over at times. So while you think you may be above the water line at one point, should the boat tilt due to sail pressure or wind or current pressure as we move through the water, that in fact could dip down below the water line, creating a siphon. So we got to get very creative about where the location of this vented loop ends up being. So at the hose run's highest point, we install a vent. And that vent allows air pressure to escape, thereby breaking the siphon pressure that otherwise would come through the line. Of course, that vent has to close as water runs through the line, and that was the problem we were having on Garuda. A 40-year-old vented loop was completely corroded. Air pressure was not a problem, but getting liquid past it was a problem. In fact, turning on the sump pump ended up shooting a stream of water inside the hull of the boat. So naturally, that had to be replaced. The floor is torn up in order to get to the sump pump. We have got one pipe removed. It's actually sitting right up here, but it needs to be threaded in here where the hole is too small. All right, a couple chisels coming through and out. Big test. Here we go. I don't know if you can see it. Here we go. Nice! The easiest way to picture this is probably not the system itself. Just consider that we're going to work from the hull towards the center of the boat, and that way we can continue to assemble things that would otherwise be in the way. Let me just show you. Okay, so the next thing is to get rid of that rat's nest right there, which leads us to the shower. We are under the sink here, and what you can see is we've run new supply lines from the hot water heater to the T-valve. Gotta love that connection, right? That then goes off to the hot shower, or it goes up to the faucet here in the sink. And then we've done the exact same thing with our cold water supply. So all of this was coming through a really narrow raceway, and I do intend to replace it, but that's a bigger job for another day. So for now, it's a matter of getting sanitation lines straight. We just want to get water supply fixtures there. However, along the way, we did install a brand new shower head. At least that's the faucet, and this is the head. It did not come with a hanger, of course. Big day. New hose going in. All right, nearing the end of the plumbing project, but we're needing to add the holding tank. So this is where we began the project, and unfortunately it's kind of where everything comes together here in the end. So let me show you the problem we're working on now. Okay, so this is the holding tank. I just have it kind of loose. It's just a dry fit. These were the pieces that originally mounted it. There was actually an L bracket down below. In fact, we're working on some holes, just waiting on a battery to charge. But here's some of the concern is, one is this is not a static environment, so this tank could move, and I don't want it to pinch down there. At the same time, I don't want to bang against fiberglass at this end as well. So a lot of motion up here in the bow. So what we're trying to do is come up with a way to mount this. Okay, then a related issue is I'd like to use this pump out, this pump that we inherited, or we found on the boat, so that I can pump this tank out myself. So that means mounting some type of bracket here. And essentially what would happen is we would take from this side of the tank, we're going to go up to a Y valve. I actually have a temporary Y valve in place right here, so you can kind of see as I dry fit some things. So we'll go from that Y valve, should be able to adjust it to allow holding tank liquid to come into the pump, out the pump, and then we'll go back through this and ultimately match up with the out to sea line as well. So I don't plan to use that system very often, but I'd like to have it in place as kind of a fail-safe. So the main system would be going into the holding tank again, and then being able to pump out from the bow in order to empty that tank. Here is the newly re-cleaned, redone V-berth. I'll try to give you a quick tour here, but what you can see is we've got the plumbing in to the holding tank. So lines coming from the Y valve off the toilet into the holding tank. There is a vent line for this holding tank. That's the black line you can probably see right there. This is the V-berth directly underneath the bed. We are storing a little bit of spare rigging in there at the moment, but it's cleaned up, repainted. That's actually the water tank that's going to be used for the toilet system. The eyesore of the anchor locker, it's emptied at the moment. The anchor's on the deck. That's coming soon. And lastly, we have a saltwater washdown pump. So this pump is coming from a through-hole near the toilet. It used to be the old toilet inflow for seawater. We actually have an old line here that I just have yet to pull out because that's near the front, or I'm sorry, aft of the boat. But the new line can be run, or you can see there that has been run to a filter and onto the saltwater pump. And now, to clean up the walls, we're installing some peel and stick tile. The finished project is night and day. So this is the area where the head itself will be installed, or where the toilet itself will be installed. And of course, this is kind of what I mean. Toward the inside of the boat, we need to work on surfaces toward the outside. As you can see, this is not a very big space. So we're leaving it open right now in order to access that. So the head will actually be last. So you'll notice that we have filled in all of the holes for where this was cut out before. All of that's been epoxied, and we've repainted it using some of that same topside coat. The old water supply line is still in place here. It's actually not attached to anything. I'm just using that as a placeholder because I'll pull the new water supply line in, and that will save me from having to reach underneath or feed something through an uncomfortable angle. This, of course, will be the discharge hose, the sanitation hose coming from the toilet. I just have it bent sideways at the moment. In fact, there's a lot of slack in it currently. It's a really long hose, but it'll attach something like this and goes inside the cabinet here. From inside the cabinet, you're going to see a number of hoses. I'm sorry about the echo. This is what happens inside of the cabinets. But this is actually the hose coming from the toilet. So from the head itself, this hose passes through the cabinet and actually comes up here above the vented loop from the sump pump. So from leaving the vented loop here, you'll see the labels saying from the head going back up through the vented loop and then to our main Y valve. So we go back into this same cabinet. And this piece of hardware here is our Y valve. Now, the oversimplification here is that wastewater will come in from the top of this to the Y. The handle's actually pointing where it will go. And if I can just move this a bit, I will show you the label there, and that is this Y will take us to the holding tank. Now this will actually be locked in place. You'll see a kind of a grommet there. That's required here in the United States because that's the only place that our waste can go. So essentially we're going to go from the head through our vented loop and then out to the holding tank in order to be stored there until it's time for pump out. Why is there a Y valve, you might ask? Well, because we're not always in the United States. This is going to be an international vessel, and so on some occasions we may want to alter that. So by turning the Y valve, we would instead have the wastewater go directly to the sea, and that goes out to the thru-hull that originally leaked in our last episode. So we have some teak veneer that is scheduled to be delivered tomorrow that will go on the outside of this cabinet. So what we're doing today is two things. The first is I've widened this hole to fit our new toilet paper holder. And the second is I'm going to create a pattern out of paper. I'm going to use an old chart, actually, an old nautical chart, because it's about the same size, in order to size the cabinet or create a pattern that we can use to then cut the veneer and put in place. So I've also filled a couple of these holes here. Don't want anybody throwing an elbow in here and going through the veneer. Alright, so we've laid out the veneer here and made a couple of cuts just using the straight edge and tried to make a few adjustments from the back panel for those unique cuts. Now we'll take them back to the boat and dry fit them. So here's kind of the overview. We'll clean it up with a little acetone and go ahead and put some contact cement on it, and then we can make any final adjustments. Well, it turns out that's very hard to show. It's actually very hard to do. So I put contact cement on the cabinet itself and then on the back of the panel of veneer, and then have stuck it on. So I'm going to try to do it with its twin here rather effectively. That was tough on a small piece. On a bigger piece, I think it's going to be even more challenging. Alright, that was a little difficult, but stuck on. So now we have to do a little cleanup and finishing. While we're waiting on the stain to dry, I'm going to move on to the second big project of the day, which is finishing some provisioning. So there are three types of provisions that we keep on board. We have our normal everyday food, we'll have our reserve food, and then we have our emergency food. So first things first, emergency provisions, they shouldn't be confused with the other two. Those are more a question of survival. So we're really talking about rations that would be part of our ditch kit. Something we would rely on should we have an emergency that requires us to abandon ship.
Abandon ship! Abandon ship!
The other two types of provisioning, though, do require some planning. So the first of which would be just our normal everyday provisions. So I'm living dockside at the marina, which means that my provisioning probably looks a lot like yours. I could go to the grocery store. I have a Winn-Dixie and a Publix that are both pretty handy to me. It's something I could be doing every day, but what I'm trying to do is grow a little more accustomed to living on the boat. So I do my best to meal plan out the week, And then I supplement that with a little bit of my food storage that's here on board. Of course, being at the marina means that I also do go to dinner on occasion. We have group cookouts and potlucks on occasion. And there's a pizza place right up the street.
Order the double cheese and sausage. Right here, dude.
Which brings us to food reserves. Now, food reserves are what I'm trying to concentrate on today. We use the reserve in situations where we've encountered the unexpected. Now, that's not an emergency. It would just be some type of delay or extended time period between being able to make normal provisioning runs. So this could be a change in our sail plan. It might be experiencing winds that had been unexpected, or perhaps current that we hadn't planned for. And let's face it, in these modern times, it also could be a port or entire country that was open at the time that we disembarked, that now is shut down once we come into port. So what we want to be able to do is extend our range a little bit, still live very comfortably by having some reserve food source. So on Garuda, this is primarily done through canned goods. So let me show you what's involved. So I've got a little bit of an assembly line going, but first thing we're going to do is take the labels here off of the can. Get as much glue as possible off. And before I let go of it, I write down what's inside of it. I'm also going to put on here the date that this was purchased. So this is October of 2020. And this can is going to go into a bucket of diluted bleach. So mostly water with a little bit of bleach in it. All right, we're below decks in the galley, and I thought I would show you how we store our provisions here on Garuda. So I've taken the liberty of removing things, but I'll show you our dry goods storage, which is here in the corner. Again, everything has been taken out, but there is a false bottom, and what you will notice is this is where we keep all of our reserves. So we're going to go ahead and add the cans from today to our reserve storage. These are the provisions that sit in our dry goods storage, and the point of these provisions is to supplement what I buy each week with my groceries. Well, with the exception actually of my rooting vegetables, these normally sit on top of that. I have a milk crate I'm going to use in the pilot berth, but for now I just have my potatoes, onions. I've even got one beet in there, so that is our vegetables that are currently being eaten. So let me just address that some of these things are kept in plastic. You may have noticed also that the cans down in our reserve food storage are sitting in plastic bins as well. This is actually for two reasons. The first of which is the cans, I don't want the cans to rub together over time or to cause any punctures, but should that happen, I mean, remember the boat is not static, so should that happen or something leak, I would be limited to just what's in that one container as far as cleaning it up. I wouldn't necessarily have to empty everything. So part of that is to reduce some of the buildup that otherwise would end up in the bilge. Some of it is to preserve the food that's around it. But in any case, it's just kind of a safety measure. This plastic is a little different. This plastic is here because we don't want bugs, which we've already talked about, but I also don't want water or any of the salt air to be able to infiltrate them. So you know, it's a little bit of a catch-22 because they are made of plastic. I mean, that's like the best stuff that we have for this. So let me just address that the idea behind these permanent plastic things is to eliminate single-use plastics. So single-use plastics are plastic bags or straws. I mean, just the horrible stuff that always ends up in the ocean. So we absolutely, not only do we want to limit it, we want to eliminate as much as we possibly can of any single-use plastics here on Garuda. But still, you can see some of our staples here. We've got instant oats, some red lentils, black beans, and rice. The rice actually continues to sit in its own bag for now. Pasta is a good example of, there are some plastics here that otherwise probably would be considered single use, but what we try to do is continue to use them over and over again. So spaghetti, for example, comes in a box. We don't want any cardboard on board, so we break the spaghetti in half to fit into a bag. This also helps with, that's far more than a single serving, but the truth is I don't have very many bags. It's just not something we buy. A lot of macaroni is kind of done the same way. Definitely don't want to have any boxes on board. So These are kept, really ideally, I would keep them in single meal kind of size packaging. I haven't done that, so it's a little embarrassing at the moment. But then these are kept in plastic storage that you can see is not only airtight, but also watertight. So here you have it, dry goods placed back into storage. There's our veggies, and we are back in business here in the galley. Had enough of the projects, but luckily Mark off of Dulcinea is interested in doing a little bit of lobstering. So we're going to head out today and try to blow off some of our project frustration steam. Okay, this is Mark. Say hello, Mark.
Hello, Mark.
Look, you can tell it's winter in the Keys because all of these boats have their coats on.
Head over here. Found another head. No matter where I go.